Hello, and welcome to the first National Security Science podcast. Today's story, A Wealth of Stealth, is written and read to you by Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Steves.
I'll share what it's like to fly a 31-year-old, 160,000-pound, nuclear-capable bomber.
The National Security Science podcast is a spin-off of National Security Science magazine at Los Alamos National Laboratory. We bring you stories from the lab's weapons program, stories that show how innovative science and engineering are key to keeping America safe. Or, as we like to say, better science equals better security. I'm Brenda Fleming, your host and also the art director of the magazine, which you can read at lanl.gov/magazine. Please send any feedback to magazine@lanl.gov. To launch the National Security Science podcast, we are releasing a 3-part series. Each part highlights a different branch of our nuclear triad. The nuclear triad is the backbone of America's national security and comprised of air, land, and sea components. These components include land-launched nuclear missiles, nuclear missile-armed submarines, and aircraft equipped with nuclear bombs and missiles. Today we bring you a story from the air component of the nuclear triad. This story is from our spring 2020 issue and is titled A Wealth of Stealth, and it is written and read to you by Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Steves, a senior Los Alamos Air Force fellow and B-2 bomber pilot. B-2s are the only U.S. bomber currently capable of dropping a nuclear weapon. For those of you who don't know, most of the nuclear weapons a B-2 can carry were designed right here at Los Alamos, and the lab continues to maintain them today.
Hello, this is Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Steves, Los Alamos National Laboratory's resident Air Force fellow, and I'm pleased to share with you a little bit about what it is like to fly the B-2 stealth bomber.
The sirens go off, my eyes snap open, and I bolt upright in my bed. Report to aircraft blares from the command post speakers. Repeat, report to aircraft. The 1980s first-generation pager that is blasting on my hip confirms the message. It's go time. It's the middle of the night, and I've barely slept in the past 72 hours, in part because I've spent a great deal of time in the hangar readying the aircraft for combat, what we call cocking it on, but also because of the sleeping accommodations themselves. I've been in the confines of this small FEMA trailer with more than a few of my fellow B-2 pilots in very close proximity. Fortunately, this time I wasn't paired up with Bear, whose call sign is fitting for many reasons, including his penchant for snoring like a large mammal. There's an identical trailer next to ours. Both are filled with rows of uncomfortable beds and heavy, stagnant air. June in Missouri at Whiteman Air Force Base is already oppressively hot and very humid. The temperature seems to exacerbate the smell of the industrial cleaner from the trailer's bathroom, along with the locker room-like scent from so many bodies in the small space. But there's also excitement in the air, and it's palpable. Despite our fatigue, we do not falter as the sirens blast. We hastily dress in our flight suits and throw on our cumbersome, fire-retardant aviation boots. I make eye contact with my fellow pilot, Shin. His call sign, an acronym for She's Hot, I'm Not, is a shout-out to his wife. Mine is Fletch, because of the personality similarities I share, or so I'm told, with the Chevy Chase character. As you might have guessed, pilots don't get to pick their own call signs, and as a result, the monikers are sometimes a far cry from Maverick and Iceman. But they were fictional naval aviators in Top Gun, and this is real life in the Air Force. We run as fast as we can through a row of waiting American-made white minivans. The pilot's request for Corvettes was denied. No one speaks, and all that can be heard are the sounds of boots hitting the ground and our heavy breathing. Even with the surge of adrenaline and the gravity of the situation weighing on us, we know exactly what to do. And we do it very fast. Every detail has been planned and rehearsed to a T. Along with several other pilots, I elect to take the shortcut to my van and leap over one of the concrete jersey barriers that separate us from our vehicles. For Shin, though, this shortcut exemplifies the fog and friction of war that famous military theorist Karl von Clausewitz spoke of in the 19th century. Not quite clearing the barrier, Shin faceplants on the other side. Scraped and bloodied, he's already peeled himself off the ground and resumed his trajectory toward our van before I can get to him. We've lost only a few seconds, and he's all right, so we'll make fun of him later. I jump in the front passenger seat and reach the window to place a red light siren on the roof of our van. Shin is in the driver's seat and turns the ignition and stomps on the gas. A wave of disco lights, as we call them, streaks across the dark tarmac, all heading to the row of hangars and awaiting B-2 stealth bombers. The vans pull up and park close to the hangars, but still far enough away to avoid being a hazard to the bomber's impressive wingspan. We bolt out of the vehicles and sprint the rest of the way, 2 by 2, to our designated aircraft. The Spirit of Washington, tail number 880332, is waiting for Shin and me. Approaching the aircraft, I hit the alert red slap switch on the nose gear. Immediately, the auxiliary power unit's engines spool up, flush-mounted entry door opens, and the crew's entry ladder folds down to ground level. I scurry up the ladder and into the cockpit. Shin takes a few seconds on the ground to brief the crew chiefs assigned to our aircraft, and then joins me inside. In short sequence, we begin to hear transmissions on the aircraft radio. We continue running our checklist steps and prepare the aircraft for taxi and takeoff, while in parallel, we pull out our grease pencils and code books to authenticate the message and determine our next move. We've been given orders to start the engine, taxi, and take off, as has each of the pilots and the other B-2s alongside us. One by one, each of the fully fueled, approximately 300,000-pound B-2s joins the elephant walk en route to the runway. We need to get the stealth bombers airborne as fast as possible. Exactly how fast we'll make it is classified, but it's pretty damn quick. The B-2 is the only known stealth bomber in the world and is capable of dropping both conventional and nuclear payloads. Today it's the latter that we're focusing on. This mission is a simulation that we call a nuclear generation. And we've got to be fast because in this scenario, enemy intercontinental ballistic missiles are headed our way. We do various simulations twice or more per year, as needed, depending on world events. Our goal is to demonstrate that we're combat ready for nuclear war. I lead the line of B-2s, picking up speed on the runway. The nose of my aircraft angles upward, and the wheels leave the ground. At $2.2 billion a copy, the B-2 stealth bomber is the world's most expensive aircraft. There are just 20 B-2s total, compared with a fleet of more than, say, 1,000 F-16s, for example. It's also the world's most strategic plane. As expensive and unique as this aircraft is, what's even more important than the plane itself is the weapons the B-2 can carry. The B-2 is the only aircraft in our nation's inventory charged with carrying certain variants of the venerable Los Alamos-designed B-61 weapons, the Mod 7 and Mod 11. It is also the only aircraft able to deliver the B-83 thermonuclear bomb, which is the most powerful in the U.S. stockpile. The two pilots on board a B-2 carrying a full load of nuclear weapons are themselves approaching a firepower level on par with some of the world's few nuclear powers. It's a heavy responsibility for an Air Force captain, who is typically 25 to 28 years old, when he or she completes the grueling year-long initial training course to learn to fly the B-2. Many years after I graduated and became a B-2 pilot as a young captain, I found myself back at Whiteman Air Force Base in the training squadron again. This time, As lieutenant colonel, I was a squadron commander responsible for the successful completion of this training. My squadron's job was to create B-2 pilots and nuclear warriors. We did. Of course, a nuclear weapon hasn't been delivered in combat since Little Boy and Fat Man helped end World War II and change the world forever. But that doesn't mean the B-2 and nuclear weapons aren't being used. These national assets are used every day to both deter our enemies and assure our allies. If B-2 pilots can avoid logging combat hours, we've done our job. Sometimes, though, the world needs a reminder. The B-2 made its combat debut in Kosovo in 1999, and since then has been a key player delivering conventional munitions in conflicts in Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We train every day and fly regularly in case we're called upon again.
B-2 Basics. The B-2 is smooth and stable in flight thanks to its size and mass. It is 69 feet long and 17 feet high and has a 172-foot wingspan, which is slightly more than the width of a football field. Empty, it weighs approximately 160,000 pounds. Its maximum speed is 630 miles per hour at an altitude of 40,000 feet, which is really not much faster or higher than a commercial airplane flies at 460 to 575 miles per hour at a typical altitude of 31 to 38,000 feet. One of the B-2's most unique characteristics is its long-range ability. It can fly 6,000 nautical miles unrefueled and 10,000 nautical miles with just one air refueling. This long-range capability means the B-2 can project air power anywhere in the world. In other words, it provides global strike for America. The B-2's longest continuous sortie to date is just over 44 hours. When the pilots landed after almost 2 days of nonstop flight, they both had beards. My longest flight has been 24 hours, though a typical B-2 training sortie is about 5 hours. Needless to say, these very long durations are challenging, but they are also very well planned. Aerospace physiology scientists develop plans for pilots to follow on long-duration flights. They consider the flight path, air refueling times. Both pilots must be awake for these, as well as for takeoffs and landings, positions of the sun, and more to determine when pilots should nap and for how long. It is also recommended to stay well hydrated, as well as to eat protein and healthy snacks to avoid sluggishness from fatty, sugary, or greasy foods. Green chili is typically avoided. The cockpit is small, with the two pilots sitting side by side. There is just enough room to stand, though not completely upright. And there is a microwave, which, out of all technological capabilities in the cockpit, seems to intrigue people the most. That and the toilet, which sits behind one of the seats. It's at the end of a small space intended for a pilot to lie down, though you have the tough choice between resting your head next to the duct, blasting out very hot air, or next to the pungent chemical toilet. Sleep on long-duration flights is a necessity for a pilot's performance, but really there is very little downtime. Flying the B-2 is a demanding task, and the associated checklists, aerial refueling, radio calls, and more can at times be a lot for two pilots to manage. There is no flipping an autopilot switch and listening to music, sending texts, or reading a paperback. Perhaps the most novel aspect of the B-2 is its stealth. Its unique batwing shape and special coating make it tough on radar operators. Its engines are inside the wing, concealing induction fans at the front of the engines and minimizing engine exhaust. This makes it difficult for thermal sensors to detect the B-2. By the time an enemy on the ground could see the B-2 flying above, it would be too late. It all works. We know because we've practiced through both large-scale multi-day scenarios and half-day sorties. I still remember one flight in particular. I was a fairly new captain and had only recently graduated
from the initial qualification course to become a B-2 pilot when I was chosen to execute a nuclear mission evaluation. My fellow pilot and I were charged to deliver a B-83, minus the physics package, over rural Nevada. We shacked, or directly hit, our target. After we landed back at Whiteman Air Force Base and got back into the squadron, the wing commander called us into his office. He congratulated us and explained that our sortie was the most important thing the Air Force had done that day. It took a little time to sink in, but I soon understood he was explaining that I had just played a first-hand role in strategic deterrence. I knew I could execute the B-2's nuclear mission, and so did our enemies and allies.
A special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Steeves. Thank you for listening to the National Security Science Podcast, Stories from the National Security Science Magazine. Again, you can find the full magazine at lanl.gov/magazine. And remember, better science equals better national security.